Hi, my name is Madeline. Welcome to my tutorial on how to paint bright northern light skies in watercolor. The supplies that we will be using today are listed here. We will be using 100% cotton watercolor paper. We will be using several watercolors, primarily phthalo blue, phthalo green, Prussian blue, and I have a combination of pinks on my palette, which are ultramarine pink, carmine, and dioxazine purple. We'll use some white gouache for star splatters at the end. I have a few brushes that I'll be using, a palette for mixing, a spray bottle, which is probably the most important tool for this tutorial today, a hot air tool to speed up the drying time, and a plastic board to tape our paper to. I am going to start by taping down my 100% cotton watercolor paper to my plastic board that I have right here so that we can tilt our paper later when we are painting. I'm also using 300 pound 600 GSM paper, which I find works well because we're going to be using so much water. There are a few things I want to point out as we begin. The first is that in order to achieve the bright lights amidst the dark colors of the sky, we're going to be layering our watercolors, starting with the lightest layer first, and then slowly going darker with each layer. This helps to preserve the brightness of the sky, because if we were to paint everything all in one wet on wet layer, the darker colors may overpower the lighter, brighter colors. And so to prevent that from happening, we're going to layer them. The second is that we're going to be using a spray bottle to wet all the layers after the first initial layer. It's fine to wet the first layer with a flat brush, but after we have our first layer down, we don't want to introduce water with a flat brush, because that potentially could either lift some of the color that's already put down on the first layer, or it could sort of erase whatever movement we've created. So by using the spray bottle, we're not disturbing any of the paint already on the paper, we're just wetting it. And then the last is that we're going to use gravity to our advantage, and we're going to let the paint really flow. And that's going to help us to achieve the feeling and the look of movement in the sky. The colors that we're going to be using for our base layer are going to be phthalo blue and phthalo green. And by mixing these two together, we sort of get a nice light turquoise. And I'm using a 3/4 inch flat brush, and I'm just making up and down sweeping motions to sort of portray some movement. And then for this middle area, I mix a little bit of ultramarine pink, carmine, and dioxazine violet because I wanted to get just kind of like a hint of pinkish purple. You don't have to do this. I'm not sure I loved how it turned out. At the very end of this tutorial, I'm going to show you other attempts that I've made of this same scene, just with different strengths of color, and you can paint this tutorial 3 or 4 times and kind of get different results each time because of the way the water moves and the way that our paints move. So if you want, you can add kind of like a hint of pink like I did right here, or if you don't want to add it at all, that's fine too. I want this layer to be pretty bright, so I don't want to mess around with it too much. So I like how that looks, and I'm going to dry this layer with my hot air tool. So I changed the angle of my camera because I feel like it might be more helpful for you to see it sort of like face on instead of above me. So I'm getting my spray bottle and I'm just really wetting the paper. And we want the paper wet because when we drop the darker color, we want that color to like really move. And so I am grabbing some Prussian blue and some phthalo blue, and I'm going to be dropping it at the top of our paper right here. And this part is seriously my favorite part of this, of painting this. It's just so fun to kind of see the paint move and flow. And because our paper is already wet, the paint is going to move. And you can sort of play around with tilting it to the left, to the right. There's really no right or wrong way. This is really an invitation to just play with our paints. And then now I'm just grabbing my spray bottle and I am making that darker blue just really flow. And the spray bottle is just a really fun way to get that movement to show with the paints. Something that I learned as I was painting this over and over again is when you're spraying it with the spray bottle, try not to spray it like too close to the paper, because then like the force of the water sort of washes off the darker color that you're dropping in. So I would spray it maybe like a couple inches away from the paper so that it's wet enough to make the color move, but you're not like washing off the color that you're adding to the paper. And so I'm trying to get my lights to sort of bend a little bit to the left. So I'm sort of making like a diagonal motion. I want the paint to sort of flow that way rather than just flowing down. And so I'm sort of spraying it from the right side, trying to get it to go diagonally down. So I drop a little bit of that pinkish purplish color that I used on the first layer right here because it looks like it got really washed out. And so I'm just adding in a hint of pink again. If you are watching this and you haven't actually started painting yet, this gets really, really messy. So I would maybe put some paper towels down before you spray all that water. My painting desk is just white, so I can actually clean it off pretty easily. But these phthalo colors generally are pretty staining, so just kind of be careful of what's underneath your paper or your painting. And for this piece, I actually wanted it to be on the lighter side, so I'm happy with the dark blue that I have over the lighter green and pink, so I'm going to dry it now. The next thing we're going to do is add some stars, and I'm going to use the white gouache by Dr. P.H. Martin's, this jar that I swear by. We are going to grab just any brush that you want to use for making splatters. And with painting splatters, just remember to use a brush that is a little bit thirsty so that you're able to get paint in the belly of the brush, and make sure to dilute it so that the paint isn't too creamy, and hold the brush maybe a little higher up so that your stars don't get too big. And the last part of this piece is just to paint something in the foreground that is a bit darker. I'm going to go with 2 shades of mountains. The first one's going to be Prussian blue, and then I think the one after I'll add a little bit of Payne's gray just so that there is some depth to the one that's closer to us. And having something dark in the foreground is helpful because it gives contrast to our sky. Actually, I'm going to add some dioxazine purple to the Prussian blue to make the front mountain a little bit darker. And I like to add birds to the end of my pieces just to give it a little bit of character. And that completes our tutorial. Once everything is dry, you can peel the masking tape. Because we're using so much water and paint, if you look at the corners, I did have a little bit of bleeding in between where the masking tape sort of touched at the corner, so you could take some whitewash and cover it up if that bothers you. And this is our finished piece. As I mentioned earlier in the tutorial, I painted this exact same piece several different times, just with different strengths of color. So this one has more phthalo green, and I used, I think, more Payne's gray and possibly indigo. This one has more phthalo blue, and this one I went a bit lighter with my darker colors, sort of like in today's tutorial. And this one is a little bit darker, and then this one is today's. And so depending on which colors you use more, whether it's phthalo green or phthalo blue, and depending on which darker colors you choose to go with, you can really get so many different skies. Every sky is going to be different, and you're not going to get the same result twice, and I think that is part of what makes this so fun and sort of whimsical, just sort of seeing where the paints go and how they dry. And I honestly just find this so much fun. I hope you enjoyed painting the Northern Lights with me. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit subscribe, and if you like my content, check me out on Patreon.